For our second presenter, I'd like to read also a brief profile of her. She's a museum researcher, too, of the Ethnology Division of the National Museum of the Philippines, and her work includes preventive and object conservation, collection management, and documentation of Philippine intangible and cultural heritage. Her current research includes the examination of the Banton cloth, considered as the oldest ikat textile in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, and the preservation of the Benguet mummies, which she and two other emerging conservators received a grant from the National Geographic Society to conduct environmental studies. She's an Asian Cultural Council grantee in 2016 and the Museum Foundation of the Philippines grantee in 2022. She holds a BA in Philippine Arts from the University of the Philippines, Manila, and recently finished her Master of Cultural Materials Conservation at the University of Melbourne. Please welcome Camille Calanno for her case study.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. And I'd also like to thank Vincent for going here in the Philippines and doing this. We were talking about it earlier now. We connected in mid-January, and now it's happening, and I'm really happy. And also thank you to the Lopez Museum, especially to Miss Marga, for collaborating with the National Museum to do this symposium. And all thanks to all of the staff who helped facilitate and coordinate and for this symposium to be a success. Well, not yet. We're not finished yet, but yeah. um, thank you. Po. So I'll be sharing with you a case study that I did in 2023. So as mentioned, I did a master's degree in Australia in the University of Melbourne, and it's because of a grant from the Museum Foundation. And um, one of the reasons why they gave the grant is for a museum. Is it for a person is a staff from the National Museum to do a master's degree and in return do something on a wider scale. And so I decided to do a topic that's going to be holistic and at the same time be like a template that could be replicated by our other regional museums. Because as you know, the National Museum, apart from the central museums, has um, correct me if I'm mistaken, 17 other regional museums in the whole Philippines. And all of those, almost all of the museums are um, repurposed buildings. And so we have issues or challenges in terms of controlling the environment. Um, so this one is my master's thesis, and then I'll share with you the published version of this one that I did with my advisor 𝐂𝐿𝐶. And so just a brief introduction about myself. So um, I started working at the National Museum in 2015 as a museum researcher at the Chemistry and Conservation Laboratory Division. So before, I don't really know anything about conservation, really. I remember during my interview, they asked me, "You came from a science high school, so you maybe know something about science." So, um, I said, "I guess so." But in my college years, I did Philippine arts, which is a total different track. And so when I came here and learned about this particular division, I learned that, okay, you can combine arts and science in working in a museum. And so I was glad that there's this particular division. And then there's a reorganization. I went to the fine arts division, which fulfilled my Philippine arts background. And then I decided to transfer to the ethnology division because I'm more interested with ethnographic materials than paintings. And so over the years, it's my 10th year this year. And I'm really happy that I get to share these things with everyone and especially my colleagues. And so I thank again the Museum Foundation for giving that grant, and so I can pursue a master's degree and study particularly preventive conservation. Just want to share this slide if you're interested with research on textiles and the mummies. The first one, the first um, publication is what we just published in February with my advisor, Nicole. This one is the same thing that I'm presenting now, in addition to what she researched in the Fine Arts Building. And then the mummy research is connected with the environment, in studying the environment. So what I did here in my research for my thesis, I applied to this project with the mummies. So we also installed data loggers in the rock shelters, but it's not really invasive because we just placed on the loggers outside and inside. We did not open or they did not touch any mummies during the specific field research. But we're really happy that the response so far, when we returned to validate, because we collected information or readings that's 10 months worth. And we're really happy that the community, the elders, understood what we are trying to help them with in terms of research. And they're really happy that we can continue logging environmental data from those selected rock shelters. And we'd like to thank the National Geographic Society for giving us a grant to purchase the loggers, to do consultation meetings with the community. And I also like to thank my um, former classmates, Fen Reyes and Sarah Soltis, who did this with me when we went to the field. Okay, and so to the case study. So the outline of my presentation will be first give the overview and research problems, and then the museum climate and environmental context, and then present the data and analysis, and then finally the findings of the research. So as Vincent already discussed about the 10 agents of deterioration, I just want to add more. So according to the International Council of Museums in 2017, one of the important concerns for museums or any collecting institution is to preserve collections entrusted to their stewardship as a contribution to safeguarding the natural, cultural, and scientific heritage of humanity. And in order to preserve heritage collections, strategies on how to avoid or reduce the impact of risks is grounded by the 10 agents of deterioration as classified the CCI. Half of these risks are categorized as particularly damaging to collections and heritage buildings located in hot and humid climates. The impact of these 5 agents, namely pests, pollutants, incorrect temperature, incorrect relative humidity, and light, are generally considered cumulative risks to collections in temperate regions, but are very common events in tropical climates, according to the Heritage Collections Council in 2002. Meanwhile, the diagram on the right shows the 6 possible layers of enclosure where dangers to heritage items can exist. The use of air conditioning systems in museums in this kind of climate is intended for controlling the interior environment to achieve optimal conditions and mediate risks for the preservation of collections, as well as providing comfort for the building visitors and staff. However, there are inherent risks introduced by environmental controls such as heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or HVAC systems for heritage buildings. Such heritage buildings were previously accustomed to unconditioned environments, while newer buildings have come to completely rely on HVAC, where mechanical failure or intermittent operation to reduce costs is encountered. Mechanical systems are also expensive and rarely offset the potential benefits if the operation does not complement the needs of the building fabric. Consequently, risks to collections occur, which include microbial damage, mobilization of salts, and dimensional changes, especially for hygroscopic materials. Further, a general convention in museums are specified temperature and RH set points for the preservation of collections. But such narrow ranges that may be acceptable in some museums may not be true for others with the many climatological and economic zones across the world. Mold growth on the surfaces of ethnographic collections made mostly of organic materials such as wood, rattan, plant strips, and textiles have regularly been observed in the galleries. High levels of moisture content and of relative humidity in an environment brings about biological activity such as mold growth. This can be more damaging to museum objects, especially when the exposures are prolonged, rapid, and fluctuating as experienced by heritage buildings retrofitted with HVAC climate controls. The same applies to some of inorganic collections under the care of the archaeology division, with mold occurring on earthenware and ivory as shown in the photos. As a heritage building that utilizes retrofitted mechanical air conditioning units to take care for collections, the building envelope has a higher risk of condensation and high moisture content. In effect, more time and effort are given to cleaning and maintenance of the collections instead of organizing collections in the repositories according to the curator. Maintenance and monitoring of galleries and repositories are regularly carried out, yet few actions are done in response to the potential risks of high temperature and high RH levels and large fluctuations of the two. Such efforts may cause unnecessary or redundant costs if there is no deep understanding or evidence based information informing optimal use of mitigating tools such as dehumidifiers and silica gel. So, as you can see, these photos were taken in 2019, pre pandemic. And then this particular case study was done. The readings collected for this case study were collected during the pandemic. It has also been observed that there are a lot of infiltrations and leaks coming from the windows, ceilings, and doors in the galleries and repositories, which introduces moisture and humid outside air. Windows and doors are potential condensation, heat, and moisture transfer points, which can lead to building problems and mold germination, according to ASHRAE 2019. So the research question was, how can the interior environment of the National Museum of Anthropology specifically be improved to ensure future care of its collections? So briefly, the aims are to identify the causes of risks to the ethnographic collection in the anthropology building, to identify the gaps and develop efficient preventive conservation practices and institutional policies, and to find long-term solutions in addressing environmental, social, and economic issues. This research more broadly focuses on collection management and the influences of environmental factors on collections within the museum and the exterior temperatures and relative humidity. It is also important to analyze the environment and its influence on the behavior of collections as it impacts how the museum's public service can be improved and good and lasting connections with the stakeholders be maintained. It is also appropriate to focus more on the preventive measures, such as managing the environment, rather than acting when something is already damaged and relying on interventive measures that can, in fact, use more resources, such as time, people, and money. This research employs a collection care survey as its framework by Joel Taylor that provides foundational information on the collections as a whole instead of individual or the most accessible objects backed up with data for analysis. Its goal to present information clearly to management is not only for funding purposes, but also to prioritize projects and collection risks. Moreover, it is a useful tool for collection care to be understandable, documented, and convincing to other museum staff. Using this framework acknowledges information that will not only come from one conservator's point of view, but rather the wider expertise of building managers, facilities professionals, collection managers, and other more experienced conservators. This research was conducted through the analysis of historical environmental data and building maintenance practices in the anthropology building, supported by substantial information that were gathered from professionals that have worked and are currently working in the National Museum. Information from other professionals outside the NMP with specialized knowledge and experience on conservation in a museum located in a tropical climate was also considered. Museum environmental standards were also used as point of reference to gauge where the NMP is in terms of environmental control. So for the scope, this research only examined the interior and exterior and temperature and RH of the NMP Anthropology building. Only the collections, galleries, and repositories under the Ethnology Division were included as their collection represents a wide range of material types and to also limit the volume of environmental data to analyze and interpret. The timeline covered for the analysis in terms of environmental readings, exhibition galleries, and collections present in storage is from March 30, 2020 to March 3, 2021. This duration shows the wet season during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic when the museum was closed. The museum staff were in alternating work arrangements, and the building experienced a month long of power interruption. Environmental and collection monitoring during this time, therefore, provided an opportunity to evaluate the internal passive climate within the building. The geographical location of the Philippines indicates its climate being tropical and having only the dry and wet seasons with relatively higher temperature and relative humidity and abundant rainfall, according to Pag-asa. The effect of climate change also predicts that the Philippines will experience even warmer temperatures during the dry season and intensified monsoons during the rainy season in the next 20 years. The graph shows that the historic outdoor climates in Manila averages between 27 to 28 degrees Celsius up, up to 1986, and then recorded as over 28 degrees Celsius from the 1980s and with 75% RH. As such, collections are likely to have experienced the dynamics of higher temperature and humidities beyond typical museum standards. The American National Standards Institute and the ASHRAE Standard 2021 classifies Manila to be in Zone 0A, or in an extremely hot and humid climate zone, which suggests that annual cooling loads are higher than the heating loads or the dependence of buildings on air conditioning due to extreme heat, and having higher RH that is influenced by seasonal temperatures and annual rainfall. In this type of climate zone, ASHRAE recommends preventing very high humidity by controlling moisture source, moderation of thermal flow, air leakage, and moisture vapor, and hydrothermal analysis is necessary. If these measures are to be observed, it is possible to reduce the over-reliance on HVAC systems, for example. For museum interior environments, it is generally known in the conservation profession that there are ideal, quote unquote, parameters set for temperature and RH to ensure favorable conditions as a preventive measure for collection preservation. But apart from the collection, human comfort and longevity of the building fabric are also considered in determining interior conditions. The Heritage Collections Council recounts that for the past decades, accepted levels of temperature and RH were 20 plus minus 2 degrees Celsius and 50 plus and minus 3% respectively on a daily basis, but are in fact not advisable for hot and humid climates. The council also adds that 65% RH with air circulation is recommended for mixed collections in the humid tropics. They then recommend that for museums in hot and humid climates, the acceptable temperature levels are between 22 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius, and acceptable RH levels are from 55% to 70% on a daily basis. However, if these levels are unachievable for various reasons, it is important to reduce high RH levels as well as fluctuations in both temperature and RH as much as possible. The Australian Institute for Conservation of Cultural Materials, or AICCM, Environmental Guidelines of 2022 recommends for humid climates to have temperature levels between 15 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius and RH levels from 45% to 65% RH, but with provisions such as these levels will differ depending on an object's material and condition, and with short-term fluctuations that does not go beyond 5 to 10% RH within 2 hours. So many ethnographic collections are exhibited in fixed display cases that hold a large volume with a few larger art items on open display, as you can see when you go around the galleries. Many are organic and hygroscopic in nature, which are more prone to biological and chemical damage with high RH levels and dampness. Potential risk to this kind of material usually happens at a threshold of 70% RH. As mentioned earlier, one of the problems of the building is leakages from windows, doors, and sometimes ceilings. Rainwater is easily accumulated in the roof deck, especially during heavy downpours, and seeps into the roof and eventually leaks through the ceiling. All of our repositories are on the top floor, on the fifth floor, right below this roof deck. As a response, waterproofing of the roof deck was done in the previous years. However, there are still problems of leakage on the fifth floor where the repositories are located. The roof deck is also one of the major heat sources, especially during the dry, hot season, as it is a huge, flat, dark surface that absorbs heat from the sun and adds to the thermal load of the building. The building also has a poor air control performance, being an old building that is originally designed for natural ventilation that intensifies high exchange rates through the windows and doors. Moreover, increased visitor numbers will also affect the internal climate in exhibition spaces, as human presence contributes to changes in RH and thus causes fluctuations. When days are hot, there are more people visiting the museum for comfort, while on rainy days, wet clothing add to moisture gain. For the exterior environment data, the graph here shows the monthly minimum and maximum temperatures and the monthly average RH from March 2020 to March 2021, collected at the weather station located in Port Manila, which is around 3 to 40 kilometers from the building. For the interior environment, data was collected using Hobo U14001 data loggers from March 2020 to 2021 as well, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, where the museum was closed to the public and even staff were not allowed to report for work. The high levels of RH were experienced and expected during the rainy months, but due to the mechanical failure of the HVAC system in the building in September to October, as marked by the blue line at the middle, the RH level somehow maintained at around 70 plus minus 3% RH, which is a more acceptable drift for museums in tropical climates compared to more than 10% RH fluctuations in the other months. This then shows how the mechanical tool actually contributes to a high risk environment rather than functioning as a control or preventive measure. However, the temperature inside the three galleries on the third floor were warmer during these 2 months, reaching up to 33 degrees Celsius. While RH levels decreased, which is ideal to prevent mold growth, having a warmer environment is not ideal for the long term, as it may cause chemical damage to the collection. So I remember my advisor and I were discussing about this. We were considering, so maybe just turning off the air conditioning could help the museum if the RH levels are lower. But if you have viewers or visitors coming in with 33 degrees Celsius, most probably people won't go to the museums anymore, just go to the malls. So environmental readings collected from the two galleries at the fourth floor were similar to the third floor in terms of the pattern, but lower in terms of RH levels. This may be due to the lesser glass showcase in both galleries and having more space, thus allowing more airflow, especially at the Hibla or Textile Gallery, as indicated by the green lines on the graph. For the two repositories at the fifth floor, RH levels are significantly lower compared to the galleries at the two other floors and are within ideal range. However, temperature levels range from 32 to 35 degrees Celsius without air conditioning. Again, having a warmer environment is not ideal for organic materials since it may cause chemical damage. In the repositories, collections are placed in open racks, so condensation is not as high compared to those objects placed inside the glass showcase. Last in 2022, a research project conducted by the LaSalle Medical and Health Sciences Institute on the topic of bilateration on the same collections concluded that the biochemical components present in the fungi are harmful to both objects and human health, which can be alarming not only to the museum staff but also to the museum visitors. So there were a group of students who did their undergrad thesis here. They collected mold samples from the collection in the storage and have found the presence of mold even if the RH is lower compared to the galleries. This then poses a big concern not only because the museum visitors can see molds on objects in exhibition spaces, which is a reputational concern for the museum, but also because it is a health hazard to them and the staff conducting regular maintenance. I also conducted several interviews with professionals within the museum and then outside the National Museum. So comments from previous NMP staff regarding operations of environmental control highlight the reactive strategies that the museum undertakes rather than creating strategically proactive ones. In the interview with past and present staff from the NMP, institutional concerns were brought up, such as independent working relations with key divisions and staff responsible for collections care, little to no expertise in understanding museum environments and controls, that includes me, regulated budget as a government institution, having a larger scope of responsibility, for instance, number of collections, regional museums, and projects, and inefficient monitoring and maintenance activities due to the lack of environmental management policy and strategies. Again, this was way back 2022 to 2023, and the data were from 2020. I think now we have developed policies. In contrast, the Lopez Museum and Library, thanks to Ms. Marga for the interview, a private museum also located in Metro Manila has a more thorough approach to environmental management given their resources and a relatively smaller scope of accountability. So in summary, this is the same graph that Vincent showed earlier. In summary, the appearance of mold on the collections is due to sustained high RH levels exceeding 70% with a temperature of around 30 degrees Celsius. Condensation happens on the surface of the collection and on the glass surface of the display cases, which are mostly the collections which are mostly organic in nature and thus mold germinate and become visible. Even presently, 5 years after the start of the pandemic, there are still existing molds in the ethnographic collections even after the HVAC replacement in 2022. This was also evidenced by the sampling experimentation, as I've said earlier, by the biochemistry students. Just this, okay. I was also made aware last year that some paintings at the Fine Arts Building show fungal growth on the wooden frames during the rainy season. And also, a meteorite at the National History Building shows signs of rust, possibly also due to high RH levels. So while I did this case study, particularly in this building, conversations with other colleagues in the other two buildings in the central museums also experienced the same effects of high RH in their collections. In conclusion, the given conditions and results make it difficult to find a straightforward solution to the recurring problem of biological damage, as all aspects are interrelated. Hence, managing collection environments is a complex task, as it needs a lot of observation, data collection, interpretation, and involves different personnel of varied backgrounds in order to come up with a collective and effective protocol or guideline. The role of a conservator then is to bridge the connection between a collection manager and a facilities manager and other staff within the institution. There needs to be communication between managers, conservators, engineers to better understand how the HVAC system operates and how collections react to the environment. Preventive conservation strategies must be planned carefully to ensure effective implementation that also has to consult the expertise of key personnel from concerned divisions and replicate effective practices from other institutions. This study is only an initial step in identifying what measures are needed to be done to inform what strategies are most appropriate to apply with the non-negotiable factors such as the building history, regulated budget as a government agency, collection types, and the consistent influx of visitors. Some recommendation that the NMP may conduct as short-term solutions to the recurring problem are the following: conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of collection, improving the building envelope, employing of strategies for managing thermal energy gains through the envelope, conducting capacity building activities for NMP staff to develop confidence and commitment in developing solutions concerning interior environmental issues, dedicating time, expertise, and research in the creation of the collections and conservation policies, investing on equipment and on human resource expertise, and upgrading of mechanical systems for long-term solutions. So as a museum researcher of the ethnology division, I'm also expected to conduct other field researches related to anthropology, conduct collections assessment and conservation in the regional museums, plan exhibitions and public programs, etc. So the reason why I said that is to encourage other staff, not just only in the NMP, to work together in order to make possible all of the recommendation that I just mentioned. So moving forward, I know this research is a huge and difficult task to take on because literally can't do it by myself, especially with the other tasks I just mentioned. So hopefully some of my colleagues here and from the audience are also interested in continuing this research. And so I'm really thankful that this symposium is happening. And so to just encourage everyone to um, look even deeper and not just to the collections, but just a holistic approach in terms of studying the environment or museum climates. Just like to acknowledge all of the people and institutions that made this thesis and the master's degree possible. So MFPI, National Museum, especially the management, DG Barnes and the DGM Jurel, Dr. Nicole Chi of the Greenwood Center for Cultural Materials Conservation, um, Vincent for actually helping me with analyzing the data because of the GCI Excel tools, and Miss Marga Villanueva and the Pag-asa for the exterior climate readings. So for questions and collaborations, just email me in this email. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just want to lastly share that if you can access the publication that my advisor and I did. So it's a comparative analysis of the fine arts building and this building. So it's open access, so you can download it for free.
Thank you, Camille, for your research. It is an eye opener, and your recommendation can serve as an inspiration for us as we try to develop policies for conservation and collections, and also to improve the um, collection environment in the museum.